I have taken down men for far less than what these three did to my wife. I have crept into enemy compounds in total silence and made hard calls under fire, but nothing in my years of combat prepared me for watching my wife beg for her life on a grainy dashcam feed while I sat helpless, 7,000 miles away, holding a rifle in the sand. The alert that changed everything didn't come through military channels. It came through a private encrypted system I had quietly built 5 years earlier. A silent alarm wired straight into the security system of my family's SUV. I was crouched in a safe house in Syria, waiting for a target to cross a courtyard, when my wrist device buzzed with a code I never wanted to see: Red Alpha Home. That meant someone at home had hit the panic button. My hands, steady through years of combat, started shaking as I pulled up the live feed from Harper's car. It was nighttime back home. Red and blue lights washed over the interior of our SUV. My wife sat in the driver's seat, hands at 10 and 2, exactly the way I'd taught her, her voice trembling as she told the officer she didn't understand, that she'd been driving the speed limit, that her daughter was in the back. The officer's voice came back loud, aggressive, almost eager for a fight. Harper narrated her own movements, unbuckling her seatbelt, stepping out slowly, hands visible. It didn't matter. 3 officers surrounded her like she was already guilty. One heavy-set sergeant with a face like a clenched fist grabbed her by the hair and yanked her backward. She screamed. Then came the sound of a baton striking her ribs, a sound I will never be able to unhear. I stood up so fast my chair crashed to the floor. My squad leader, Felix, saw my face and immediately reached for his sidearm, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. I was watching my wife get beaten on the side of a highway, while officers laughed and shouted that she was resisting. Then the back window rolled down an inch, and I saw the terrified eyes of my 6-year-old daughter, Violet, watching her mother bleed out on the pavement. The feed cut to black. The sound that came out of me wasn't human. Felix grabbed my shoulders, telling me to stand down, asking what was happening, but I was already moving. I told him I had to go home, that my wife was in the ICU because 3 cops had put her there, and if he didn't get me on a transport within the hour, I would walk out of that desert myself. I wasn't asking permission. I was a Tier 1 operator who had spent his life being someone other men couldn't reach. But in that moment, none of that mattered. I had failed at the only job that ever truly counted: protecting my family. The flight home was a blur of darkness and turbulence. I sat surrounded by ammunition crates, replaying the footage over and over, not as a grieving husband but as a soldier analyzing an operation. The officers had turned off their body cameras, but they didn't know about the surveillance system in our car. They'd left a 6-year-old witness in the back seat. They hadn't bothered to check who the vehicle belonged to. They assumed Harper was just a woman, alone in a nice car, an easy target, someone with no one dangerous behind her. They were wrong, and they were about to find out exactly how wrong. When I landed in Virginia, I drove straight to the hospital, and what I found in that ICU room would turn my grief into something colder and far more dangerous than rage. The smell of antiseptic hit me before anything else, and the steady mechanical beeping was the only sound in that ICU room. I stood frozen in the doorway. Harper was almost unrecognizable, her face a map of swollen purple and black bruises, her jaw wired shut, a tube running down her throat to breathe for her, her arms suspended in a cast. I had spent my entire career protecting strangers on the other side of the world, and I hadn't been there to stop 3 men with badges from destroying the one thing that mattered most. I walked to her bedside and took her hand, the only part of her not bandaged, and it was cold. I whispered that I was there, that I wasn't leaving, but she didn't respond. A nurse appeared, startled by the sight of me, still in tactical gear, unshaven, hollow-eyed from 40 hours without sleep. She told me visiting hours were over, and when I asked where my daughter was, her voice trembled as she explained that social services had taken Violet because the police report claimed Harper had been intoxicated and endangering a minor. Harper never drank, not once. This wasn't just a cover story, it was a deliberate effort to bury her. I kissed her forehead and told her to rest, promising that when she woke up, the men responsible would wish they had killed me instead. I didn't go to the police station in anger. I walked in with empty, visible hands, playing the role of the confused, distraught husband, because if I had walked in the way I actually wanted to, with the precision I once used to clear enemy compounds, I would have been shot before reaching the front desk. The station buzzed with ordinary noise, officers laughing about sports scores, completely unaware that colleagues down the hall had nearly killed a woman the night before. I asked for the chief, gave my name, and watched the room go quiet for a moment before an officer reluctantly let me through. Chief Felix greeted me with a forced smile and cold eyes, sliding across grainy photos of minor injuries, claiming Harper had exited the vehicle screaming threats and had assaulted an officer twice her size. It was a bold, rehearsed lie, and it terrified me precisely because it might actually work in court. He mentioned an open wine bottle they'd found, hinted at a DUI charge, and warned me that if Harper woke up, she'd go straight from her hospital bed to a jail cell. I wanted to reach across that desk and show him what real violence looked like, but I held back. In combat, you never fire without a confirmed target and a clear line of sight, and revealing the dashcam footage now would only give them time to destroy it. So I asked for a copy of the report instead, and Felix, mistaking my calm for surrender, handed it over, along with the names I needed: Sergeant Grant, Officer Kyle, Officer Evan, and now Chief Felix himself. I picked up my daughter from a grim shelter that smelled of bleach, and when she saw me, she didn't run into my arms. She flinched. She asked in a whisper if the bad men were gone, and I lied and told her yes. As I drove away with her, I looked back at the city skyline, knowing Sergeant Grant was probably out there celebrating, unaware that he hadn't just picked a fight with a civilian husband. He had picked a fight with a man who had once led the darkest operations the military had to offer, and the legal phase of this fight was already over before it began. Grief is something I could not afford that night, so I checked us into a secure hotel 2 towns over, refusing to trust our own house. Once Violet finally fell asleep, I opened a black case I'd retrieved from storage, not containing a weapon, but a signals intelligence receiver and a hardened laptop, tools I once used to track insurgents across borders. Tonight, I would use them to hunt 3 men hiding behind badges in a quiet Virginia suburb. Using the report Felix had so arrogantly handed me, I found their addresses, phone numbers, and financial records through channels no civilian should have access to. Within minutes, I had cloned their phones and was listening to their conversations live from a dive bar near the precinct, where they were celebrating. I heard Grant congratulate the youngest officer for handling his first violent stop like a professional, casually explaining that writing resisting arrest on a report turns the lie into truth. Then the conversation shifted, growing quieter, more careful, mentioning a trunk, an inventory, cash that had already been split as hazard pay. Harper never carried cash except for one specific purpose, and when I checked our bank records, I found a $5,000 withdrawal from 2 days earlier. This wasn't random police brutality, it was a robbery disguised as a traffic stop. They had seen a woman alone, assumed there was money involved, and used violence purely as cover. Grant even bragged that he had the town locked down, that with one phone call he could get my house searched for drugs and have my daughter taken permanently. Hearing him mention Violet by implication was the final line. My rage settled into something colder and far more useful: clarity. I called an old contact from a number that hadn't been active in years and asked for a specific kind of equipment. No weapons, just tools built for quiet infiltration. It arrived before dawn in an unmarked bag left behind a dumpster, containing lockpicks, noise dampeners, fiber optic cameras, a small drone, and at the bottom, a patch from my old Ranger unit, a symbol of who I became when I was at my most controlled and most dangerous. My first target was Kyle, the weakest link, the one whose nervous laughter at the bar told me exactly where the cracks were. I waited until night, slipped into his suburban home through a sliding door, and moved past his sleeping family without disturbing a thing. Beside his bed, I placed the Ranger patch next to a printed still from the dashcam footage showing his boot mid-kick against Harper's body, a message meant only for him to understand. I left without a trace, and by morning, my lookout confirmed Kyle hadn't moved. That same morning, I visited Harper again, and this time, her fingers twitched under mine. Her eyes opened just enough to find me, and she whispered my name before asking, barely audible, whether they had taken it, the locket from the mirror, begging me not to let them keep it. It wasn't sentimental jewelry to her. I had given it to her before my first deployment years earlier, embedding it with a tiny encrypted drive, an old habit I thought I'd left behind. They were sitting on something that could expose parts of my past I never wanted found, and possibly something far worse I hadn't anticipated yet. Kyle never reported the break-in, which told me everything I needed to know. An innocent man calls the police when a stranger enters his bedroom in the night. A guilty man panics quietly and calls his co-conspirators instead. Listening through the cloned phones, I heard Kyle's voice shaking as he told Grant someone had been in his house, that a military patch and a photo from the dashcam had been left beside his bed while he slept. Grant brushed it off, insisting the husband was a nobody with a clean file, but his tone had shifted, tighter, more paranoid, especially once he mentioned that a bank had flagged one of his deposits. I hadn't flagged it directly, I had simply nudged the banking system to trigger a routine audit on unusual cash movement, a small pressure point designed to make them sweat. But something still didn't add up. Why target Harper specifically? It felt too precise for a random stop. Then my cloning software recovered a deleted text from Grant's phone, sent 20 minutes before Harper was pulled over, describing her car, her plate, and the fact that she was alone carrying $5,000 in cash. This wasn't a random shakedown. Someone had fed her to them deliberately. Tracing the burner number that sent that tip, I found it had only ever pinged from 2 locations in the past month, a local casino and my own house. The list of people who had been inside my home recently was short. Me, Harper, Violet, and Harper's brother, Julian, a man constantly chasing new business schemes and recently asking Harper for money. Security footage confirmed his car in our driveway the day of the attack, him going inside briefly and leaving looking frantic. He knew about the cash. He knew the route she'd take. This wasn't just police corruption anymore. This was betrayal from inside my own family. I drove straight to Julian's overpriced apartment, slipped past the gate, picked the lock, and stepped inside to find him relaxed on his couch, clearly a man who believed he had just cleared a dangerous debt. I unplugged his television without a word, and when he asked what I was doing, I told him calmly that I had seen the text he sent Grant, the one giving up his sister's location and the cash she was carrying. He denied it at first, then broke down completely, admitting he owed dangerous people money and had been told it would just be a routine stop, a scare tactic, nothing more. He hadn't known they would actually hurt her. I recorded his full confession, every name, every date, every detail of Grant's operation running cash, skimmed from traffic stops for years. When he begged me not to hand it to the police, terrified Grant would kill him for talking, I placed a one-way bus ticket to Montana on his coffee table and told him he had 20 minutes to pack, warning that if he ever contacted Harper or Violet again, I would stop being his brother-in-law and become something far more dangerous instead. I watched his bus leave the station the next morning, feeling no relief, only a cold, hollow space where trust used to live. Now, with Julian's confession in hand, I needed one more piece before I could bring the whole rotten structure down. The locket Grant still had, and whatever he thought he'd discovered inside it. I couldn't wait months for a federal investigation to slowly grind through indictments while evidence conveniently disappeared and dirty cops retired on full pensions. I needed the locket back immediately, because if Grant had opened it and found the encrypted drive inside, he wouldn't just see old photos. He'd uncover evidence of my classified past, proof that I wasn't just a soldier but a Tier 1 operator, and that knowledge would make him far more dangerous and far more prepared for what was coming. Getting into the evidence room required a distraction, so I used my access to Grant's cloned phone to spoof a fake emergency, a supposed shootout at a warehouse district, pulling every available officer away from the station in a chaotic scramble. With the precinct reduced to a skeleton crew, I slipped in using a cloned keycard, moved silently through the empty halls, and made my way down to the evidence room. I found Harper's casebox, but the cash and the locket were both missing, replaced only by the planted wine bottle meant to support their fabricated DUI story. Then a voice behind me, calm and smug, told me I was looking for something. Sergeant Grant stood on the other side of the chain-link cage, his weapon raised, dangling the locket from his fingers. He admitted he hadn't been able to crack the encryption on the drive inside it, but the mere strength of that encryption told him I wasn't just a grieving husband, that I was something else entirely. He gloated that there were no cameras down there, that this was his station, his story to write, right up until the lights suddenly went out and a shot rang wild into the darkness. Red laser dots appeared on his chest and forehead as my old squad leader, Felix, and 2 of my former teammates stepped out from the shadows, weapons raised, having arrived just in time. Grant dropped his weapon, and I stepped forward to take the locket back from his trembling hand, telling him quietly that he should have taken the bus out of town with Julian while he still had the chance. We didn't arrest him, Arrests come with rights and lawyers and a system that assumes innocence, and tonight, there was no system, only a locked evidence room, and a man realizing he was no longer the one in control. My team zip-tied him to a chair while I used his own radio to lure Kyle and Evan back to the station under the pretense of urgent business, and when they arrived, my team took them down in seconds with practiced, silent efficiency. Lined up together on the concrete floor, the three of them finally understood they weren't dealing with a grieving husband anymore, but a man who had once specialized in dismantling entire networks. I gave them a choice: decades in federal prison for racketeering and assault, or the name of the man running the entire operation above them, along with whatever evidence they had against him. Grant broke first, whispering the combination to a safe in Chief Felix's office, admitting that everything, the payroll, the target list, the payouts, was hidden inside. Just as the truth was finally within reach, the lights flooded back on, and I realized we were no longer alone in that basement. Standing at the top of the stairs wasn't backup for us. It was Chief Felix himself, flanked by a full SWAT team with rifles raised, accusing me of holding his officers hostage and committing domestic terrorism. Grant started laughing hysterically, certain the tables had turned back in his favor, while my own squad leader urged me to fight, insisting we could win a standoff even against 6 armed officers in a confined space. I told him no, because a firefight here would be a bloodbath, and instead I raised my hand slowly and told Chief Felix he should have checked the live stream before making his move. I nodded toward the laptop sitting on a crate nearby, its camera light glowing green, and explained that I had been broadcasting this entire confrontation to a private server, and moments earlier had forwarded that feed to every news outlet in the state, along with the FBI field office. The color drained from his face as his phone began buzzing uncontrollably, followed by the SWAT leader's phone doing the same, and within seconds, dispatch confirmed that the FBI was already on the line, watching everything unfold live. The SWAT leader, a decent man named Miller who had clearly grown tired of following corrupt orders, lowered his rifle and turned it toward his own chief instead of me, ordering him to drop his weapon. Felix screamed that it was a trick, that we should all be killed, but the truth was too bright now for anyone to ignore, and even his own men chose survival over loyalty to him. He dropped his gun, was cuffed by officers who had once obeyed him without question, and was dragged toward the stairs, still shouting that he owned this town, that no one could touch him. He was wrong. Within the hour, federal agents flooded the building, led by an agent named Vance who looked as exhausted as I felt. They took custody of the evidence, the laptop, and the prisoners, and while they initially moved to cuff me as well, my lawyer arrived quickly, framing my actions as citizen intervention against an active criminal conspiracy. After reviewing the dashcam footage and Harper's hospital photos, Vance made it clear I wasn't being charged. Instead, they needed my full statement to permanently close the case against Chief Felix and his crew. I handed over everything: the locket's hidden files, Julian's recorded confession, the bank records, the intercepted messages, giving federal investigators the ammunition to dismantle the entire operation. By morning, the story had exploded across every news outlet, with the footage of Harper's beating sparking outrage nationwide as the hashtag calling for justice trended everywhere. I ignored the reporters swarming outside and went straight to the hospital instead, where I found Harper finally awake, her eyes finding mine the moment I walked through the door. I broke down at her bedside, overwhelmed by relief, telling her it was finally over, that every one of them was gone. She squeezed my hand weakly and asked about Violet, and when I promised our daughter would be brought to see her that same day, Harper closed her eyes and whispered that we had done it together. I believed, in that moment, that the nightmare had finally ended. I was wrong, because corruption doesn't simply disappear when one corrupt station falls. Sometimes it has roots reaching into places far more dangerous than a local precinct, and those roots were about to make themselves known in the most violent way possible. 3 days after the arrests, while I sat with Harper helping her sip water through a straw and Violet quietly colored at the foot of the bed, my phone rang with an unknown number and a distorted voice informing me that taking down Chief Felix hadn't ended anything, that Felix had simply been a middleman for a much larger operation, and that I had just cost a criminal network a valuable source of income. When I demanded to know who was speaking, the voice calmly told me they were already there, and looking out the hospital window, I saw 3 black SUVs pulling up outside, armed men in tactical gear pouring out openly, clearly not police and clearly not hiding their intentions. This was a hit squad sent to silence the one witness who could still expose their operation. I immediately warned my team stationed nearby and told Harper we had to move right away. No time for panic, only action. I ordered Violet under the bed, unlocked the wheels on Harper's hospital bed, and pushed her into the hallway as gunfire erupted below in the lobby. Avoiding the elevators, which would have trapped us completely, I made my way to a service freight elevator using a stolen keycard, descending into the basement where two armed men were waiting near the laundry room. There was no time to hesitate. I fired, dropping both instantly, and pushed the bed past their bodies without looking down, murmuring reassurance to Harper as she cried silently beside me. My team was waiting at the loading dock with a van running, laying down suppressive fire as I lifted Harper into the back and returned for Violet, carrying her out in an improvised sling made from bedsheets. As we sped away from the chaos, sirens wailing behind us, Harper asked where we were going, and I told her the real safe house this time, understanding now that the corruption we'd exposed locally was only the surface of something far larger and international in scale. I called Agent Vance immediately, telling him I had just located the rest of the network at the hospital and urging him to send serious backup. What started as a fight against 3 dirty cops had exploded into a confrontation with an entire cartel operation, one I had unknowingly disturbed the moment I exposed Chief Felix. But they had made the same fatal mistake as the officers before them, assuming that taking out one man like me would be simple. It wasn't. Over the following weeks, the FBI rolled up the entire network, from street-level dealers in Virginia to suppliers across the border, once they discovered Chief Felix had spent a decade laundering cartel money through the police pension fund. Felix ended his own life in his cell before facing trial. Grant and his officers took plea deals to avoid execution, ending up in a supermax facility where even fellow inmates wanted them dead. Julian received 5 years for drug possession after a friend of mine in another state made sure his bus ride ended with a search of his bag. He still sends letters to Harper sometimes, letters I burn before she ever sees his handwriting, because some family bonds, once broken by betrayal that deep, aren't meant to be repaired. We couldn't go back to our old house, the one with the picket fence and flower beds Harper had always loved. It had been quietly sold through a shell company while we were in hiding, and honestly, it no longer felt like home anyway, just a place where my own brother-in-law had sold us out for a gambling debt. Instead, we moved to the mountains, somewhere quiet, somewhere far from cameras and headlines. Healing turned out to be far slower than Justice had been. Harper's physical scars faded into thin, pale lines over time, but the flinching didn't disappear so easily. For months she couldn't sit in a moving car without gripping the door handle, couldn't handle sudden loud noises without her whole body tensing. I retired completely, walking away from the military life I had known for so long, trading the identity of a soldier for the quieter role of husband and father. I spent my days building fences and installing motion sensor lights around our cabin, not the tools of war I once knew, but the tools of peace. I taught Violet how to fish in the creek behind our home, watched her laugh freely again for the first time since that night on the highway. I held Harper through the nights she woke up screaming, reminding her softly, every time, that the only thing in the darkness was me. One evening in late autumn, sitting together on the porch with Violet asleep and warm in my lap, Harper touched the faint scar along her jaw and asked quietly if I missed my old life, the missions, the sense of purpose that used to define me. I looked at her, at the golden light catching her hair, at our daughter breathing peacefully beside us, and told her honestly that I never really had a purpose before, only orders to follow. This, right here, was the only mission that had ever truly mattered to me. She smiled then, a real smile, the first one that reached her eyes since everything had happened. We had survived betrayal from every direction, from corrupt officers, a corrupt chief, an international cartel, and even from family. We walked through all of it and came out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. People often think justice looks like a gavel striking a desk in a courtroom. I know better now. Real justice looks like sitting quietly on a porch with the people you love most, knowing with absolute certainty that the men who tried to destroy your family will never again draw a free breath. If this story moved you, made your chest tighten with anger, or your eyes sting with emotion, I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because these stories only reach more people who need them with your support. I want to hear from you honestly in the comments. If someone in your own family betrayed you the way Julian did, selling you out for money, would you ever find a way to forgive them, or would you cut them off completely the way Mason did? And let me know what kind of story you want next. More military justice thrillers like this one, family betrayal dramas, or something entirely different. Until next time, stay alert, watch your surroundings, and never forget who truly has your back.